Hello, Warsaw Missionary Church. This is a new way to do church. But we're continuing on with our series on living the new life. And today, we're talking about leadership. This is the time when you notice leadership, when you're going through a crisis. That's when leaders rise up. A month ago, how many of you knew the name of Dr. Anthony Fauci? I didn't. Most people didn't. Now we wait with bated breath whenever he speaks. During 9/11, it was Rudy Giuliani that popped to the surface as a leader. You see, along with living the new life is learning how to lead a new way, the way that Jesus led. We are going to learn leadership today by going back 3,500 years, back to Exodus when the children of Israel were in Egypt. In Exodus 2, verses 23 to 25, it says this: the Israelites continued to groan under their burden of slavery. They cried out for help, and their cry rose to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He looked down on the people of Israel, and he knew it was time to act. You see, the children of Israel wanted out of Egypt. They didn't want to be in Egypt anymore. They wanted out. It goes on in Exodus 3, verse 7. Then the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering, so I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey. The land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. Look, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abused them. You see, the children of Israel wanted out of Egypt. God wanted the children of Egypt. God wanted the children of Israel out of Egypt. So that sounds like an overwhelming consensus. Both the children of Israel and God wanted the children of Israel out of Egypt. But where were they? Egypt. They were in Egypt. Why? Exodus 3:10. It needed something. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt. God needed Moses to lead the people out of Egypt. God needed a leader to lead them out. Who are the people today that are in a mess because they need a leader to lead them out? Who is that leader? That leader's you. You're that leader. God designed us to need leadership. It's a frailty built into our very DNA. Flocks of birds don't need leaders. Schools of fish don't need leaders. Ants working in unison don't need leaders. But apparently, human beings need leaders. Have you ever seen them drive? Why do we need leaders? That becomes clear in Judges 21:25. In those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. And look at the mess that they got into. God leads his people through leaders. Why? Because we are rebellious people by nature. So the children of Israel wanted out of Egypt. God wanted the children of Israel out of Egypt, and then God gave them a leader named Moses. Once that happened, everything went harmoniously. Isn't that what happened? No way. They fought Moses and they fought God every step of the way. Why? Wasn't Moses taking them to the promised land? Yes, but motion means friction. Working through this passage a number of years ago, I came up with the definition of leadership. Leadership is dragging people kicking and screaming where they want to go. Leadership is not bullying people to do what you want them to do. It's getting them where they want to go. It's working to get them where they actually want to be. But they can't get there without a leader. Now, I want you to pause the video, and the group of people that are with you, your family, your friends, who's ever there, pause the video and take some time to talk about these questions. You see, biblical leadership requires three things. First of all, it requires serving. It requires serving. That doesn't seem to fit into what we think is leadership. We would probably use the word shoving rather than serving, because that's the example that we have, especially in our culture. But notice what Jesus says in Matthew 20, verses 20 to 28. Then the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus with her sons. She knelt respectfully to ask a question. "What is your question?" he asked. She replied, "In your kingdom, please let my two sons sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and one on your left." But Jesus answered by saying to them, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering that I'm about to drink from?" "Oh, yes," they replied, "we are able." Jesus told them, "You will indeed drink from my bitter cup, but I have no right to say who will sit on my right or on my left. My Father has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen." When the 10 other disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant. They were ticked. But Jesus called them together and said, "You know how the rulers of this world lord it over people, and how officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must become a slave. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Our culture knows pushing and shoving and lording authority. But Jesus said, no, leadership is serving. And I know that sounds like a soft kind of mamby-pamby leadership. Serving in our culture? We want Rambo. You know, we like Lee Iacocca, who said, "Lead, follow, or get out of the way." We like manly men like Clint Eastwood and John Wayne. "Well, Pilgrim, you better stop or you're dead where you stand." That's the kind of leadership that our culture lifts up. But what's the example that Matthew points to? He points to Jesus. How did Jesus lead? Look at his life as leadership. He lived a sinless life. It talks about character. He led by example. He didn't do things that he didn't teach things he was unwilling to do himself. He wasn't distracted from his mission for 1 minute by criticism or applause. He took on the cruelest form of punishment at that time without complaining. He even forgave the killers as they were killing him. And he trained 11 men that would run things after he left. And he continued to use them even after they bailed on him. What's the bottom line? You see, in the last 2,000 years, there have been about 7.7 B as in Betty billion followers. 70 million of them were willing to die rather than deny him. That's not bad. That's actually a great leader. Does he have any rivals? Is anybody else, any other leader come close to that? Not at all. Not at all. I know a pastor, and he was pastoring the cool church in town. And it was a church plant, and they were meeting in a rented facility. And after the service, a man came up to him and said, "Hey, you know what? I would love to be a part of the leadership of this church." And the pastor said, "Oh, great. There's a vacuum cleaner over there. Why don't you take that vacuum cleaner and sweep the floor?" And the guy goes, No. That's not what I mean. I mean, I want to be a part of the leadership here." And the pastor said, "Yes, I know. There's a vacuum cleaner over there. Why don't you take that vacuum cleaner and sweep the floor?" And the guy just looked at him with a confused look on his face. It's like, I don't get it. No, I want to lead. I don't want to serve. But you see, leaders must learn how to serve. Jesus said that. Jesus said that. Let's pause now for discussion. Hope you had a good time of discussion. Now we go back to the passage in Matthew 20. And we're going to take a look at something in verse 22. It said, "But Jesus answered them by saying, 'You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I'm about to drink?'" And then verse 33, he goes on, "You will indeed drink from my bitter cup." Here's the second thing that leadership, biblical leadership, requires. That's suffering. Biblical leadership requires serving. It also requires suffering. A.W. Tozer said, "It is doubtful whether God can bless a man greatly until he has hurt him deeply." Remember the first time I heard that quote, I said, "No way, that is not true." But the longer I lived and the more examples in life and in Scripture that I've seen too many examples of that to dismiss that. Look for yourself. Think for yourself. Look at these lives. Joseph suffered as a slave, then as a prisoner, before he was the leader in Egypt. King David suffered as he ran for his life from King Saul. Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, John the Baptist, got his head chopped off. Jesus himself suffered and died. The Apostle Paul, he even lists them. 5 times he was whipped with 39 lashes. 3 times he was beaten with rods. He was stoned. He was shipwrecked 3 times. Many sleepless nights. He was hungry and thirsty and often went without food. He shivered in the cold without enough clothes to keep him warm. Even Moses himself. Moses had an incredible first 40 years of his life. He was raised in Pharaoh's house. And he had all the advantages of Egypt. That was critical training for him, but that wasn't enough. He needed 40 years in the backside of the desert for character development. He was enrolled, without his knowledge, in the backside of the desert school of leadership development. What's the tuition? Everything that you have and everything that you are. That's where he spent 40 years. That's quite an education. A.W. Tozer's quote, another one, "The reason why so many are still troubled, still seeking, still making little forward progress is because they haven't come to the end of themselves. We're still trying to give orders and interfering with God's work within us." That's what happens when we don't understand that God is using suffering to build us into better leaders, biblical leaders. Leadership is developed through suffering. The children of Israel frustrated both God and Moses to the point that each of them wanted to kill all the people. And God and Moses played this reverse tug of war. Moses said to God, "They're your people." And God said to Moses, "No, they're your people. Your people. No, they're your people. I don't want them anymore." It was so difficult. They went through that suffering, and Moses developed as a leader. Have you ever wanted to kill the people that you lead? You're not alone. God wanted to do that. Leading means suffering. So let's pause for a moment and discuss that. I hope you had a good time discussing that section. Matthew chapter 8, starting in verse 5. When Jesus returned to Capernaum, a Roman officer came and pleaded with him, "Lord, my young servant lies in bed, paralyzed and in terrible pain." Jesus said, "I will come and heal him." But the officer said, "Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come into my house. Just say the word from where you are, and my servant will be healed. I know this because I am under the authority of my superior officers, and I have authority over my soldiers. I only need to say, 'Go,' and they go, 'Come,' and they come. And if I say to my slaves, 'Do this,' they do it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed. Turning to those who were following him, he said, "I tell you the truth. I haven't seen faith like this in all Israel." So, leadership requires serving. Leadership requires suffering. And then thirdly, leadership requires submission. See, and that's really hard for leaders because leaders have this bent towards action. Let's get this done. Let's get that taken care of. Get her done, right? And sometimes that's a problem for leaders. King Saul, in 1 Samuel 13, while Israel was being attacked by the Philistines, he was supposed to wait for Samuel to come and make the sacrifice. But he's looking around and it's like, my men are getting scared and they're going home and there's no Samuel. I'm going to go take care of this by myself. I'm going to make the sacrifice. And he did the sacrifice. And as a result of that, he lost his position as king. Andy Stanley tells of a time when he was a youth pastor. And he was a youth pastor for his dad, Charles Stanley. And they had this idea that they were going to raise money to get blankets for all of Atlanta. And so they recruited lots of people and they did a lot of promotion and they were planning on this fundraiser, and then they'd give all these blankets to the homeless people in Atlanta. Well, eventually the deacons came to him and said, Andy, we've been thinking about this and we've decided we're not going to do this. We don't think you should do this. And he said, but why? It's a good thing. We're going to help people. He said, no, this is not something we should be doing. And he was really upset. And he said, we've already started promoting it. There are other ministries that are part of it. We've already started doing some advertising. And they said, no, we're not going to do it. And Andy thought long and hard about what he was going to do. At that point, he was living in the home with the senior pastor. And he could have said to his dad, hey, Dad, these deacons are driving me crazy. Not demons, but it may have seemed like it. They're driving me crazy. But he didn't do that. That would be an end run. And so he contacted the other ministries. He contacted the radio stations and simply said, we've decided not to do this. And he owned their decision. And he said it was on a Friday afternoon, about 11 o'clock, it started raining and it was really cold. Then it turned into freezing rain. He said by 4 o'clock, all of Atlanta was shut down with freezing rain. He realized that was the day they were going to do that. Had he gone ahead, he would have lost thousands of dollars. God uses lines of authority. We need to submit. We need to learn to submit as leaders to those in authority over us, because there's power in that. The centurion knew that. There's power when we learn to submit. Back when I was in high school, I was driving around Elkhart late one Friday night, and I had my friend Jeff Miller with me. And my dad worked at Miles Laboratories at the time, and so we drove up to the gate at Miles Laboratory. And I said, I was pointing, here's, not this building, but that building, that's the building where my dad works. And we're just sitting there by this gate, and all of a sudden, the gate opened. What do? What would you do? You're in front of a gate and the gate opens? I drove in. I had no business being there. And I thought, what's the deal? Why did they open that? And I was a little nervous, and we drove past, the building where my dad works, and we drove through there, and I went to the Mishawaka Street exit, went up to that gate, and just stood there for a little bit. Sure enough, they opened the gate. I thought, that's cool. And I pulled out, hurried up and got out of there, and then I go, oh, I know what it is. And I grabbed my rearview mirror and turned it around, and sure enough, on the back of my rearview mirror was a tag. My dad had used my car to go to work, and he had a tag on the back of the rearview mirror. They looked in that, and I had power. I had authority because I was operating under the name of my Father. We have power and authority when we submit and when we come under the name of Jesus. That is where the power is. That's where the power is, when we learn to submit. Okay, let's take some time and discuss this. So, you had a good time talking about leadership this morning? Or maybe this afternoon? You see, each person is a leader. If leadership is influence, and you have influenced people, then you are a leader. You've shared your opinion and others have listened. You went right when everybody else went left. They noticed that, and some actually followed your lead. You have influence. You are a leader. Now, you may not think of yourself as a leader because, I'm not bossy. But you're a leader. Some people have the gift of leadership, and we tend to compare ourselves with the people that have that gift and think, I'm not like them, and because I'm not like them, I'm not a leader. That is simply not true. You're a leader. Be a better leader. If you learn to lead like Jesus, you will become a better leader. Why? Why do you need to be a better leader? Because somewhere there's a group of people stuck in chains, stuck in a mess, stuck in slavery. Slavery to alcohol, slavery to workaholism. There's all kinds of slavery going on in our world today. And they're looking for a leader to lead them out. That's you. Now go change your world.